Old Salt was quite the place to be.
This was a big deal back in the time.
Let me show you the Grand Ballroom, and this is worth the price of admission right here.
Wow. Hey Randy, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Kelly. I'm doing great. Nice to have you at the Old Salt.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you reaching out to Appalachian Memory Keepers, and this is one of the premier properties in West Virginia. We're so excited about being here today. Tell us a little bit about the history of this place. So where are we standing right now?
Okay, we're at historic Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, in Monroe County, which is considered Union, which is the county seat. And this was the competitor, if there was a competitor, to the Greenbrier Hotel.
Everybody knows the Greenbrier.
Yep, yep, absolutely. So this was a major force, the spring waters. This property is unique that it has 3 springs on it: a freshwater spring, a sulfur spring, and then the iodine spring, which the iodine back in the day was the only known iodine spring in America.
Wow, that's a good marketing point.
That brought in a lot of people, sure did.
So this is a whole complex of buildings as we spin around here.
Yes.
Tell us what we're looking at, kind of going over this way.
Okay, this of course is the historic hotel. These properties, this was built around 1820. This is the innkeeper's house, and this is all native limestone that was quarried right here on the property.
Wow.
And then up on the hill, we have 2 what we call cottages, which are 2-story brick antebellum homes. There would have actually been 5 of those buildings back in the day, and we believe that those were built by the wealthy South Carolinians that came here for the summer months particularly.
So the people that would have visited this this springs in the early, mid, and late 1800s, where did they come from, and how did they get here? We're in the middle of nowhere.
We are in the middle of nowhere, and that's part of the drawing charisma to this property. South Carolina seems to have the biggest group of people that came to the springs of the Virginia back in that era. And I think a few reasons drew them here: the natural beauty, the great water, the people, but the healing properties of the springs. We have to remember that modern medicine was a long way from being modern at this time, and this was the Mayo Clinic of its day.
And there was a whole circuit of these springs within 25 miles of us?
Yes, yes, many springs here, and people would intend on visiting as many of these springs as possible because of the healing properties. Every spring had different mineral traces in it, and so whoever would come here would likely go to the red sulfur, the white sulfur, and the blue sulfur. All the sulfur springs were kind of on a circuit, like you say, within basically 25 miles.
Now, you were telling me a little while ago that up on this hill right here, there used to be a big hotel.
Yes, it was a stone building. It was referred to as the Erskine House. Mr. Erskine was one of the early owners of this property, and it was 72 rooms. And probably back in the 60s, after Dr. Wiley bought this property and moved here, that building had deteriorated to the point where it was a safety hazard, and so it was just let go, and then the stone was hauled out by the local folks.
And across the road there, we can see, I guess that was the old store.
Yes.
Right there, and post office, correct?
Correct. Not only a post office, but this was the Confederate post office during the war between the states. And there's a historical marker there to acknowledge that. And the old church, the chapel we call it, was most likely built by the folks from South Carolina that visited the property. And so the early morning services would typically be the Episcopal services, and then the afternoon would be the Presbyterian services.
So 2 different denominations shared the church.
They sure did.
Boy, too bad we couldn't all get along like that today.
It would be a different world. It would be a different world.
And then we got 2 little buildings here. I see one on the right. What is the one on the right?
Oak the Bathhouse, the biggest building there. And then the one on the left is the freshwater spring house that supplies all the water to this property.
And the actual spring is up the road a ways, and
Yeah.
it flows, what, gravity feed down to that, and then pump from there to the whole.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. And Indian Creek follows Route 219 all the way around this property.
Does kind of a horseshoe just behind the old hotel here. And
yes. Well, Kelly, right here where we're standing now, this would have been part of the old kitchen, which was an extra wing onto the hotel. And if you can imagine feeding as many guests as they would have at maximum capacity, that's like feeding a small army, literally. So the old kitchen was here. It's been gone for a lot of years, but a drawing by a buyer depicts that old kitchen being in place here. Okay, well, Kelly, we're in the old hotel right now, which was built around 1820. And the builders were from Lexington, Virginia. Last name is Fullen. And there's still Fullens in this area. And so a lot of history here. This would have been one of the parlors back in the day. And there's one of the paintings of Buyer above the fireplace.
And who was he?
He was a artist from the 1840s and 50s. I think he did maybe about all of the small towns of Virginia and the springs and points of interest. This room here has later, after Dr. Wiley bought the property in the early 1960s, was converted to a kitchen. And but a lot of the elements of the old hotel are still here. Here's one of the key boxes with the Sulphur Resort Hotel stamped right on there. And then inside is keeping up with keys.
Wow, that would have been a nightmare trying to keep track of all the room keys.
It would have been, yeah. One of the things that fascinates me about the old fireplaces, and this is the first downstairs fireplace. In 1862, in August, Colonel Jenkins and his Confederate troops were here making their plans for the famous Jenkins Raid. And so they left Union, West Virginia, went up towards Buchanan, West Virginia, maybe went as far south or westward to South Point, Ohio, and then back. And they tried to gather up funds and whatever they could find for the Confederacy. Here is one of the original safes, Sulphur Springs Company. And this would have been a critical piece of equipment to have back in the day. And I'm sure it's seen the combination turned a many a time.
Is there any record of bad outlaws ever raiding the place?
Not that I'm aware of, but you know, the outlaws, they did make their way into the area. Frank James was in Princeton at one time.
Of the famous Jesse James gang.
Yes, and the James gang actually robbed a bank in Huntington, West Virginia. Wow. So they did get around. It would be interesting to know who has been here and gone over the years.
Especially after the Civil War, it was a lawless time in this area.
It sure was.
It was a lot of horrible things. Reconstruction was a very difficult period. And you were telling me that Union, the county seat here, had a Union, no pun intended, military force stationed here even after the war.
For about 4 years after the end of the Civil War, Monroe County was strictly a Confederate county of Virginia. And so Reconstruction was a hard time in our local history and our nation's history as far as that goes. And this was no exception. Let me show you the Grand Ballroom, and this is worth the price of admission right here.
Wow.
Where you see the big, I guess that's a dog up on the platform. That's the musician's box there where the orchestra would entertain for the dances here. This is almost like stepping back and Gone with the Wind.
That's what I was just, it kind of took my breath away walking in here. This is magnificent.
Yeah.
imagine all the beautiful ladies in their big hoop dresses and dapper men twirling and whirling.
Yes. The ownership of this property has had numerous owners. In the early 1960s, Dr. Ward Wiley purchased this property and made it his home, and they lived here, and his daughter, Betty Farmer, lived here until her passing about a year ago.
What year do we know that it opened for the first time? 1820 or something?
Around 1820, as early as we can tell.
That's 200 years ago.
Yeah, and this was still the new frontier of Virginia.
Yeah. Yep. And so when is the last date that we know that it was open, that it closed?
Seems like the 1930s and the Great Depression,
Put it
I
out of
think, was part of the end to it. The other end to its survival became as modern medicine evolved, and then the railroads, as they came through the Greenbrier Valley, through Hinton, Alderson, Fort Spring, and Ronsford, and into White Sulphur Springs. Those resorts at Penn Springs and White Sulphur were walking distance from the rail line, so that had an impact on the visitors here as well. And we've got photos and sketches of leaders of the Union on one wall. And I believe this may be General Appleton, a Union general that was actually one of the later owners of this property after the Civil War.
And you were telling me that he was one of the officers from Massachusetts in the Denzel Washington movie.
Yes, he was a recruiter, and way I understand it, he started out the war as a private, and at the end of the war, he was a brigadier general. And he was in a lot of the major battles, and then after the war, he would buy this place, ironic as it may seem, buying a resort in the South. And we found invoices from the town of Union, from businesses, referring to him as General Appleton.
And he ran it for what, 20, 30, 40 years? I mean,
Something
a long
like
time.
That. It was a pretty long stretch.
And then came to a horrible end. What happened to him?
Yes. Well, being the great outdoorsman that he was, he got thrown by a bull here on the property and gored to death.
Oh.
So it was...
Survived all the horrors of the Civil War to get gored by a bull.
Yep, he sure did.
Wow. So once they registered, Randy, would they have stayed in this building, or would they gone across the street to the big hotel?
Most likely when they would sign in here, there's a possibility that they could have stayed here. This would have probably been the more expensive room per night. But for the folks from Charleston, South Carolina area, that probably wasn't a problem. But very likely they could have been visitors to the Erskine House, the 72-room building, or the cottages. Again, there were 5 original cottages. So where they stayed would have been one thing, but what they were able to do with the healing springs was probably the main reason of most folks being here.
Absolutely, that was the big draw. So now we get to go upstairs, right? What's up there before we go up there?
Okay, well, we've got the presidential suite that's right above us. Halfway up on the mezzanine, we have the musicians box for the Grand Ballroom, and then we have some rooms on both sides of the hallway upstairs. But this would have been the more expensive place to stay.
This would have been for those Charleston elite.
Yes.
Let's go upstairs.
Okay.
All right, so we're on the upper floor now.
We sure are. And there's rooms on both sides of the hallway here. Behind me, this is the presidential suite.
So this would have been considered the best room.
Yes.
Would have had a fireplace.
Yep.
Do we know if the wallpaper's original or?
I think it's much later.
Much later. Beautiful wardrobe there.
Yes.
Dressing screen.
This is our Salt Library room. And you'll notice lots of things related to the riding horses in this room, which was always a big deal here at the Old Salt. And also for the Dr. Wiley's family, they were much into horses as well.
Now there's a big horse barn on this property as well.
There is, a 16-stall stable.
Is this one of the most unusual properties that you've ever represented?
It really is. The history here is all about formal and farm life in Virginia. And of course, later years, West Virginia. But this was one of the icons of Monroe County. And again, for the new owners to come in with the age and era that we live in now, it's a great opportunity to see this resort brought back to life.
This is the type of property that if you're lucky, it's up for sale once in your lifetime. And you know, something like this gets treasured and you rarely see it on the market.
Exactly.
It's been what, since the doctor bought it in 1960?
Around 1963, so it's over 60 years in this same family, which thankfully they saved this property. The same thing that happened to the Erskine house, no doubt, would have happened eventually to all the buildings here. So the great footprint is still here for somebody to put the shoes on for the next generation.
Absolutely. Does each room have its own name, or do we know?
Not for sure.
Is this a bathroom?
This would have been a bathroom. Yes, there's 2 baths on this upper level, one here and one on the other side.
Would they have piped any of the spring water in here, or people took the waters in little huts over on the creek?
Yeah, I think most of the soaking would have happened in the bathhouses on the creek, but it's very possible.
So a typical room. Not super spacious.
No, not really.
I like that saying on that quilt there, or cross stitch, remembrance is the sweetest flower that in a garden grows.
So true.
Another fireplace.
Yep.
Wooden floors.
You know, this flooring up here is the oak, just like downstairs, so that very well is the original.
Interesting. Was that about 5 inches width?
Mm-hmm. I have a staircase on both ends of the building.
Okay.
Well, Kelly, here we are on the banks of Indian Creek, which pretty much goes through the entire property. And water's always been important and continues to be important in Monroe County. Across the creek, we had the 2 mineral springs. And out in the distance, you can see the Sulphur Spring house. And just a short distance down below it,
Even further down in that brush down there.
yes, is the Iodine Spring. And again, back in the day, this was the only iodine spring known in America.
Wow.
And of course, the healing properties of iodine in itself are substantial. And then the mineral water from the sulfuric springs were very sought after.
I wonder where they had to have big gardens, probably down this bottom, you think?
Well, I think so, but I've also read in history that the resort had a garden over on the Greenbrier River down near Talk at what we call Barger Springs. And the reason they had a garden there is because of the weather was a little warmer, and they would have additional 2 to 3 weeks early to get a garden planted, and then later that the garden would still have fruits and vegetables producing. So this was quite a deal. When you think about getting to talk it from here is quite a little jaunt, but to have that fresh produce would have been critical.
And we're standing on the road, on the old Stagecoach road. I'm thinking like Old West Stagecoach. Was it something like that?
It was very much like that. Monroe County is actually known for those old stagecoaches, and with the number of sulfur springs that it had and freshwater springs, that was a main means of transportation back in the day.
Wow. Man, history is everywhere we look today.
It sure is. It sure is.
So the name of this cottage that we're getting ready to go in, Randy, is called the Monroe Cottage.
Yes.
And so I assume it's named after James Monroe, the president.
Yes, Governor of Virginia and later President of the United States. What was he, 5th president, I believe?
That sounds right. The Monroe Doctrine.
The Monroe Doctrine.
So speaking of presidents, am I right that 3 different presidents visited the springs here?
That's correct. At least 3, Monroe, Madison, and I believe Van Buren.
Van Buren.
Also, we believe Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy, was here. Statesman Henry Clay, Senator Henry Clay was here, we believe, and other notable statesmen and prominent business people back in the day. Napoleon's nephew was here.
And again, anybody who was anybody came here. This was that type of place. This was where the elite, the rich and the famous, spent their downtime.
Absolutely. And plus, this resort employed a lot of local farmers, tradespeople, you know, just across the board. They spent a lot of money with the local community, so it was all local here. There's our guard dog. What are you doing, Bubby?
He wants to be in the video. Put me in, put me in.
Yeah. I thought you were camera shy.
I sure do appreciate you taking the
Oh,
time
thank
to show
you.
me this. This is really cool.
I'm glad to share it with folks. Of course, ultimately I'll be happy to sell it to a new owner, but not realizing the magnitude of the history that's here has been a real blessing to me to get to try to figure out some of it.
And you grew up nearby, and so you've known this all your life, but you've probably learned a lot.
I have learned a lot. And my first visit into this property was just a few months ago.
Really? And your whole life driving by it probably thousands of times.
Yes, absolutely.
And you know, likely the importance of this video that we're shooting today is that this could be, you know, maybe the last time the public is able to see it for another 60 years.
Very likely could be.
So we appreciate so much letting us in to capture it, because whoever comes in is going to need to put a lot of work into it and probably change a lot of it. So I'm glad we got to see it before those changes took place.
Well, great. Maybe we can have you back. We'll find the right buyer and we can do a part 2.
Before and after.
Before and after. There you go.
Thank you.
My pleasure.